Welcome back to Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Well, one of the great resources in New Haven is the Fortune Video Archive, Fortune Video Archive for Holocaust testimonies. Today we have Joanne Rudof from Fortune, who has a new documentary out called I Am Free, But Who Is Left? A Holocaust-related film. She's here to tell us all about it. Joanne, thanks for coming into the WDT.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So Thursday night, if you're listening to this live, October 16th, it's going to be the first screening of your new documentary, I Am Free, But Who Is Left, 5:30 at the Humanities Quadrangle. But I'm assuming the film will then be online, or how will people see it?
No, it's it has been screened a couple of other places before.
Okay.
This is not the first screening. I've screened it in Boston. I've screened it in New York, and we had a screening scheduled here in New Haven for October 9th, 2023.
Okay.
And we canceled it because the timing was just not going to work.
Oh, 2023?
Yes.
Oh, this has been out a couple of years.
Yes. But COVID and then October 7th have been.
Right. So this will be the New Haven premiere.
Yes.
Is it available online? Like people want to?
Not yet.
But it will be.
Yes.
So as the write-up says, this movie documents a mother, a father, 4 brothers, and a sister living in a town I can't pronounce. Rubieszów in Poland, a small town with majority Jewish population. They thrive economically and academically despite anti-Semitism. Survivors of the family in the town describe the Nazi invasion, brutality, destruction, and murder. Personal photographs and documents reflect the first-person account. Does the town still exist?
The town exists, but there is no Jewish population.
Sort of like where my relatives came from.
It was never
Poland,
reconstituted. And the population of the town prior to the war was more than half Jewish.
Oh, wow. How big a town is it?
About 14,000 then.
Wow. So there were 7,000.
Yes, over 7,000 Jews.
And then the Holocaust, it was wiped out.
Yes.
Wow. So do like 7,000 people live there today, or non-Jewish people? Or do like 7,000 people live there today, non-Jewish people?
I don't know the population today, but the population of Jews is 0.
Wow. So how did you find the survivors of the family of people that live there?
I wasn't looking for survivors. In 1987, we recorded these 3 brothers as part of the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust testimonies. And one of them especially said several things that really encapsulated important principles that I used to use when I was teaching. So a few years later, I made a montage of 14 minutes that included excerpts from his testimony. He spoke about issues that are not often spoken about when people talk about the Holocaust in popular culture, but in Holocaust studies are well known and certainly well known by survivors. And one of my ambitions was to take his testimony, which was 2 hours and 20 minutes, and make it into one short 30-minute program that could be used independently. And that was on my to-do list. And I never got to it while I was working because I had other pressing issues. And when I retired, I got to it. And what I realized after watching it several times was his story was not told sufficiently in his testimony.
What's his name?
His name is Frederick Orenstein. We had his 2 brothers' testimonies, and one of his brothers, his youngest brother, had written a book. So between the 3 testimonies and the book, and a lot of other research and other testimonies, we had actually 19 testimonies of people who mentioned Rubieszów. We had 4 testimonies, not including Fred's 2 brothers, that particularly mentioned Fred Orenstein. So I had a lot of material to work from. And when I started working on it, I created a spreadsheet, actually, of important events. And every event I verified in history books and in documents. And the spreadsheet ended up having some 200 lines, and it was the event. It was chronological. Who told it and the source. And from that, I was able to create a narrative and then went through the testimonies and picked out pieces that told that narrative.
The story of both Fred Orenstein, his brother. What are his brothers' names?
His two brothers. One is Seymour, called Sam, and the other is Henry. And in the initial first draft, I had two other testimonies of women who talked about Fred Orenstein, particularly.
What was it about Fred? Like, who was he? What why is his story?
Fred was the oldest son of this prosperous merchant in Hrubieszów. And when he graduated from gymnasium, he wanted to go to medical school, and he was rejected by all the medical schools in Poland, even though he was at the top of his class.
We're talking 1930s?
Yes, and people under, at the bottom of his class were admitted. He ended up going to medical school in Montpellier, France. When he came back, he practiced in Warsaw, but he almost he was told initially he'd have to go to medical school all over again. But his father had a bit of a connection, so he was able to take a very difficult exam and then practice medicine. So he was in Warsaw when the war broke out. His next brother was home, and the third brother was in a very small town clerking for a judge because he had completed law school. And there were two much younger children. There was a gap of 14 years between the oldest and Henry, and then a much younger sister who was 2 years younger than Henry. So there were two families almost age-wise. And the story is just an amazing story that encapsulates so many issues dealing with the Holocaust. Each of these brothers was in at least 5 camps.
5 concentration camps?
Yes.
Wow. And they survived. Then was most of their family wiped out?
The rest of their family was killed. Their parents were killed in a mass shooting. The brother that did not survive was killed on a death march. He was with Fred at the time.
Wow.
And the younger sister was separated much earlier on and sent to Stutthof. And they verified with people who were there how she was killed.
So they were survivors, and their town was destroyed, and their family was destroyed. And it's these 3 brothers.
Yes.
They're in the focus of Joanne Rudolph's directed film, I Am Free, But Who Is Left, which is getting its New Haven premiere screening and is soon to be coming onto the web. So what happens? Tell me more about their story and what makes it unusual or interesting that you wanted to tell it.
Well, every story that we have is unusual. Every story is unique. But I was able to put together a narrative that was more than one person's story, that was very much a story of the town. And
tell me about the town and what you learned.
Pardon me?
Tell me about the town and what you learned.
It was a very small town, Hrubieszów. It was mostly Hasidic, but they were not Hasidic at all. And they went to gymnasium. They went to the rigorous public high school. All 3 of these brothers. Henry, the younger brother who survived, was not old enough to have entered high school when the war began. As I said, one was in Warsaw, one was in this small town, the rest were home, and they reunited and separated and reunited and separated. The brothers who were in Hrubieszów and Sam, who was the lawyer in this small town, went back to be with his family. The town was on the Bug River, which was a dividing mark between Soviet-occupied Poland and German-occupied Poland. And the father and 3 of the brothers escaped to the Soviet Union, and until June of 41, they were pretty comfortable there. 2 of them were teaching school, and Henry was in school. He went to high school, and the father was with Henry. When the Soviets invaded, they barely escaped a mass shooting. They were...
When the Soviets invaded or Nazis?
Pardon me?
When the Nazis invaded or the Soviets?
When the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
When the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, they were rounded up to be shot in a mass killing, and they were close enough to hear the shooting and were able to escape by bribing a Polish guard. And eventually, they were able to get back to the town of Hrubieszów. Fred, in the meantime, was in Warsaw, and he brought his mother and sister there because he was practicing medicine. And he speaks of the Warsaw Ghetto in ways that are heartbreaking, but genuinely true. And one of the issues he deals with is starvation. He's a physician, so he really understands what starvation does to the body. He speaks of lice, which we never hear or see on popular depictions of the Holocaust. And almost every testimony, people talk about lice infestation, which caused typhus and other terrible diseases. And his description of it is unbelievable. You can see it. He talks about situations in which he thinks he can control his survival and then realizes he can't, which the Holocaust testimony scholar, the most prominent one, was Lawrence Langer, and he labeled that as choiceless choice. It doesn't matter what choice you make, you have no control over what's going to happen to you. And he describes so many situations like that. What's interesting is he doesn't describe other things that his brothers describe that are also quite extraordinary. A beating that he and Henry got and their punishment in the Camp Plaszow. And he never talked about that, but Henry talks about it extensively. So they supplement each other's stories in a way that you can get a fuller picture of many of these concepts. The concept of liberation is a myth. Survivors were not celebratory at liberation. They were in such terrible physical condition that they couldn't be. And Sam talks extensively about a DP camp where
Displaced person. Yeah.
and thousands of people died because they were fed by the Allies who had good intentions, and they couldn't process the food because they were so used to starvation that by giving them rich food, they got dysentery and they died. And that's something we also don't hear about. It didn't end with liberation, and liberation was not a happy time. And Fred describes it so graphically when he talks about being liberated by an American unit, and he was on a death march. Another piece of this history that's seldom mentioned are these death marches. And he sits down on the tank, and the American soldier gives him a cigarette. And he says, "I'm free." He says, "But that's when I cried. I never cried until I was liberated." Because that's when he realized his losses. I'm free, but who is left? And he was alone.
And that's the name of the latest documentary produced by Joanne Rudof from the Fortunate Video Archives. So what happened? The story also follows then what happened to the town and happened to these brothers. What happened to the town? What happened to the brothers after the war?
So the two that were together went back
to the town.
Sam and Henry. And they were told that if they didn't leave quickly, the Poles would kill them.
Why was that?
Because their property was taken over, and they were afraid, the native Poles were afraid that it would be taken back by them. Also, Henry heard two Polish women sitting in a park saying they didn't like what Hitler did, but he did one thing right. He got rid of the Jews, and it's too bad he didn't finish the job. So they left and went back to the Western occupied part of Germany, and they were reunited with the other surviving brother, Fred, who was a physician in another DP camp.
And that's displaced persons camp. Yeah.
Yes, a displaced persons camp. And eventually they were brought to the United States, to New York, by an uncle. And they were, all three of them, extraordinarily successful. Fred again took exams and practiced medicine till he was almost 80. Um, Seymour, known as Sam, also worked very hard when he came here and established a successful business. And Henry, who was some kind of a genius, became a toy inventor.
Hmm. And are they alive now, these three? Or?
No. Henry was alive when I started working on this, and I would.
Oh, so did you ever interview Frederick or Seymour?
They were all three interviewed.
All three were interviewed. They died
in 1987, we interviewed all three of them.
Out of how many? You did a lot of interviews. How many did you do overall?
How many did I do? I did not interview any of these men.
Fortunate, I mean.
They were done by our volunteer staff, Dana Klein, I think Laurel Vlock, and Susan Millen. But personally, I don't know how many I've done.
No, I mean the project has done how many?
The project, about 4,500.
Okay. So why is it, so you decided that there's this unfinished business when you were retired from a full-time job from Fortunoff, and you said you wanted to get back to the story of these three brothers, especially
Well, it was one brother I wanted to get back to, and then discovered I needed all three of them. Plus, initially I had two other people in the first draft. One of them, it was way too long at the beginning. You know, when you do something like that, you start big and then you get tighter and tighter and tighter. And it started out being like 2.5 hours. And my co-director, producer, editor, Lauren Slanger, and I worked at getting it shorter and tighter and shorter and tighter. And one of the other women who talked about Fred Ornstein saving her, we did not ultimately include, but there's another woman in there who describes a mass killing that she witnesses in Hrudyeshev. And her testimony is actually in Hebrew. And all of the documentary has subtitles because a lot of people have difficulty with accents. And Henry has almost no accent. He was very young when he came here. But Sam has quite a heavy accent. So everything that we do, we subtitle, even though it's in English, because almost all these people speak with a heavy accent, or even a slight accent is sometimes difficult for people.
Talking to Joanne Rudof, whose new documentary is I Am Free, But Who Is Left. You spent 33 years as an archivist at Fortunoff?
Yes.
And now you're semi-retired? What's your...
Yeah, I'm retired, but I still am working on projects for the archive and my own research.
And what are you working on now in addition to this movie?
I just finished a paper for a conference dealing with women's issues. And it's another topic that's not discussed very much, a little bit more today than it used to be, but that's myths that arose in the concentration camps.
And you talked about how this movie gave you a different view from, quote, superficial cultural portrayals of the Holocaust. And what kind of different view did you give you? And what specifically changed your mind?
Well, you know, most of the movies that one sees have a liberation scene. And the liberation scene is always celebratory and wonderful, and everyone's happy and celebrating. And in fact, I would say in 99% of the testimonies, people talk about maybe a sense of relief, but they're not happy. They're not celebrating. Most of them were too weak, too sick, too debilitated, and had no sense of being able to move forward.
That makes me think of other conflicts like Syria, Sudan. Now you have Gaza. There were a lot of people who were starving to death. Do you think how does this story fit into the people surviving those tragedies?
You know, I'm always struck that there's this notion that if we learn about the Holocaust, we can prevent further genocides, and nothing could be farther from the truth. I think one of the worst lessons of the Holocaust, but a very important one, is how cruel people can be to each other when we dehumanize others. And it's happening now. It hasn't stopped since the war, and it happened a lot before the war. So people who survived Bosnia, I think, are very comparable to Holocaust survivors. The experience may differ in degree, in length, but I
This is
think
so interesting, Joanne. So you're saying that you're questioning this idea that telling the story of this Holocaust or other genocides will help prevent others. And yet we would all agree your life has been dedicated to the notion that it's still so important to tell these stories about the cruelty. Why is it important?
because we have to understand. I don't know if we know how it happened. I mean, historians have explanations, psychologists have explanations, economists, sociologists, but it's always a confluence of a lot of different factors. The commonality is the dehumanization and the cruelty. And if we don't realize how a little insult at the beginning can lead to something like this, that dehumanizing others, including immigrants, including people who may not speak English as well as we do, can start down a slippery slope. It doesn't have to, but it can. And if we realize that can happen, then maybe we can change our own behavior.
So is that what motivates you? Like, what motivates you even in retirement? Can continue documenting the Holocaust as most survivors die and Holocaust denial has become more prominent, and that all over the world, including Middle East, we having genocide continue. Why do you do this work?
I can't change the world, but I can change individuals, I think. And I know that during my career at Yale that I did influence a lot of students who changed their career goals, who changed their perspectives. And one by one, I could do a little bit of good in this world. I can't change the world, but I can change individuals. And maybe one of those people can grow up, if you will, to be someone really influential.
Well, I've always admired the work of Fortunoff from the outside is the process of documentation. I think there's something evil when evil is not documented and people could deny it existed. And we see this over and over again. And Holocaust victims are dying out. Do you think there's a value, just whether or not you can change the world, whether or not you're going to win a political argument, whether or not genocide continues? Do you think there's a crucial role in documenting it just for the sake of documenting so people can never deny that it happens?
Absolutely. First of all, the Holocaust, I think, was the most important historical event in its century, in the 20th century. And we do learn from history. History never repeats itself exactly, but we can learn from history so that we may not make comparable mistakes, not the same mistakes, but comparable mistakes, so that we don't justify killing.
And we're going to now always have the story of Frederick Orenstein, his brothers Seymour and Henry, in the little town in Poland that was destroyed in the Holocaust, and their family was destroyed because of the hard work of Joanne Rudof and the new-ish documentary she has, I Am Free, But Who Was Left. If people want to find out more about this, where should they go? To the Fortunoff website?
To the Fortunoff website, and they can go to the screening tonight.
All right. Thank you, Joanne. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for doing the work. Thanks to Doreen Schertnecki, who's doing a great job behind the controls at WNHH This Week and Last. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all weekend long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.